All right.
I don't know why we're here, but we are here and we're gonna get it done, whatever it is that we've gotta get done. And the first thing I'd like to bring up, it's not directly on the agenda, but the town is close to finalizing the memorandum of understanding with the test center. And part of that will be a group that will work with the test center, in which there needs to be a designee from this committee. I do not have on the agenda a vote on that, so we can't vote on anything. Steve Layton has expressed an interest in serving in that role, and I would ask if anybody has an objection to him serving in that role between now and when we get to the next meeting and have a formal vote to make him our designee, let me know. But otherwise, if you can participate tomorrow in that morning phone call, I'll focus it to you.
So Steve, this is just an informal sense of the meeting kind of thing, accepting,
Yeah, I need
yeah,
to,
your suggestion, yeah.
either I or somebody from this committee needs to sit in on this phone
Yeah.
call tomorrow, finalize it, but we need to designate a representative from this committee.
Yeah,
And Steve has expressed an interest in doing that, and I'm just trying to get a feel if anybody else does, but we'll put it on the agenda for the next meeting
Yeah.
as a formal vote,
Right.
okay?
good.
Thank you. I don't know anything about the phone call.
I'll fill you in, okay? I didn't want to tell you about the phone call in case everybody had a different opinion about.
Yeah, you didn't want to waste your time.
She's not here today, but for those of you that don't know, Gilda from the Enterprise, who's done, I think, an excellent job
Yes.
of covering us.
Yes.
And, putting it into the
absolutely.
paper. She is moving on to another position with the Cape and Island Radios.
Oh.
So,
That's a loss for the enterprise.
I don't know,
Yeah.
I don't know who's in the audience, but maybe. Are you working for the Enterprise? Sure, absolutely, sure.
Yeah, she was good, she was,
Yeah.
Take this.
shoot, you do good to stay.
That is a loss for the enterprise.
And I'll wait till we get to item 5, reports of members and staff for 3 or 4 other items we have. So, Steve, it's your item 1, discussion on developing a urine diversion contract with Home.
Thank you. One of the tasks of somebody, well, one of the main tasks of the Mass TC contract is to recruit volunteers for the urine diversion program. The most realistic way of doing that is if we can show them a real contract that they will sign, showing their obligations, the town's obligations, the subsidies, the fees, and the monitoring and so on. This has to be done by the end of July. If we give the Mass Test Center even only a month to actually solicit people, although it could go past the deadline, but the town managers have told us that they'd like to have some results by August 30th. And so I jotted down some thoughts. So I want us to give them as much support as possible. I mean, any such contract will not be fully written by us. It will be, get inputs from the new Fresh Pond Committee, from the Board of Health, from the town managers and financial managers, and probably other people that I can't think of, and eventually approved by the Select Board. So this is just an attempt at beginning something, and you all received this. I'm looking for comments and other ideas, and for specific numbers to put in for the subsidy formula and any fees. I'm hoping that Steve or Amy know numbers so we can make that consistent with other technologies, because fees wouldn't be just for the pilot project. They would also be long-term. If the pilot project works and everybody and their brother is using urine diversion toilets, this would be the formula that would come into play. And you don't want those people, or the people who are choosing traditional IAs, or the people who are choosing sewers or have sewers forced on them, to think that they're not being treated fairly.
So if I can speak to the issue of subsidies directly. Corin's in the audience, and I might turn to her at some point here, but there was a program run in West Falmouth to look at some IA things in which there was a subsidy arranged through some grants and a couple of other things. We also heard from Z about the pond in Barnstable where they provided some funding. If you go down the path where the first 50 folks or 60 folks who participate help us to get to the point where urine diversion is now an approved IA, the next person is eligible for a 60% tax credit. 60% of their cost of converting as a tax credit, okay, under the state regulation. So the first 70 people, the first group of people are not eligible for the tax credit.
What if they have some skin in the game?
What do you mean?
In other words, if the formula
I'm
doesn't
just-
cover all their
no,
costs.
you made the statement that you thought it would, whatever you did the formula, that it would apply thereafter, okay? I think whatever the subsidy formula that gets worked out is specific to the 70 participants, 60, 70 participants that help us to get to the point where the next homeowner can get a 60% tax credit for their cost of putting in the IA, okay? So in my mind, knowing that, I go, what's the cost to put a urine diversion system into a house? And what's 60% of that? And that may be the level of subsidy we should consider. That's my thought process so far.
You mean
Oh,
for the
because
new,
you're saying the first 50
They don't get that, they
would
don't get
not
it,
get the credit.
they don't get the tax credit,
Do they get the credit? Let's say that it cost them $10,000.
okay?
Let's say the subsidy was 5,000.
Okay,
So they have 5,000, just to keep the math simple. So that they have 5,000 of their own skin in the game, as the saying goes. That was their legitimate expense. Do they get a credit on that?
no, because until it's approved, as an IA, and until the Board of Health directs people to put in an IA system,
Got it.
okay? You know, it has to be the Board of Health says, your system's no longer functional for what it has to be in that area. And then that 60% tax credit kicks in up to, and I don't have the number in front of me right now.
$18,000.
$16,000 or $18,000, so it's a big chunk. It's a big
Yeah.
chunk. But, you know, when the subsidy first came out, I said, why are we giving subsidies? But the more I've looked at it and thought about it, I realized that we've got two examples so far. We wanted to look at a range of IA systems and how they work, which, you know, the Buzzards Bay Coalition set up and organized, and there's data from that about certain systems are good or bad. It turns out the layer cake's not as good as we had hoped, but people got compensated for volunteering and joining into that program. Same thing over in the Barnstable example. So, but once it's an available IA, now it rolls over into the state tax credit.
And let me,
That's
if I
an
can,
important point.
Tom talking.
yeah, let me suggest, and I'll use John's term hysteresis here. There's gonna be significant hysteresis in the system, given how rapidly DEP has moved on any of these other IA things, right? Because they're not going to, at the end of this study, say, oh yeah, this is good stuff, let's do it. I promise you, there's gonna be multiple years before they approve it. And until it's approved, as you've emphasized already, there's not gonna be any possibility of tax credit for these systems. So I don't know how you build that in, but I would have a hard time imagining 3 years after the study was finished and we submitted the finished, refined, polished results to the state, that there would be anything even 3 years after that period.
You're a pessimist, I'm actually an
Yeah.
optimist. I think if this program gets off the ground, then there's, over the course of the 3 years, there's an ongoing conversation with
Wow.
the right people in the DEP, because, you know, there's a lot of pressure on the Cape
Yeah,
to implement this, and there's, you know, we're talking about it and we get articles in the newspaper and this, that, but when we come around to start drawing up watershed plans in this community and other communities, and suddenly, you know, hundreds, if not thousands of homeowners in any given watershed are being told they gotta put a IA system in at some dollar value.
Yep,
They're gonna wanna find the best one they can get.
With the least money.
Yeah, they're gonna wanna find the best one they can get. I was gonna leave off the least money. I was just gonna say the best one they
well,
can get.
hopefully we can
Most value
redirect,
for the, per quarter peak.
hopefully we can redirect some of the energy that's focused on trying to get us to act very quickly to
Yeah,
keep it in-house and get their people to act quickly. But I'm just saying, I think it's gonna be a very long time, I'm guessing.
You know it's gonna be at least 3 years, it's a 3-year program
Well-
before they get the results to study.
Well, that's what I said, that's just, for sure, it's gonna be that, but I just can't imagine after we get it all together and hand it in to them that they, right away say, oh yeah, that's good stuff,
But
we're
we'd have
gonna
to
go with it.
petition them get to work.
Yeah,
The plan is to talk to DEP as soon as possible, even before this starts, to find out what they are going to want in terms of data.
Right, but I think the way the memorandum of understanding is, to a certain extent structured, the Mass Tech Center is now gonna be the point for saying, this is what we're gathering, this is what we're gonna do. And they're going to be the point to push on the DEP to make sure the DEP concurs with what they're doing.
Right.
Okay?
yeah.
Ken's been,
So
Trying to
I
get in
think,
here.
I have a little, I disagree a little bit with equating the mass tax credit for an IA with the subsidy you would give someone who's taking a significant risk in trying out a new technology that might also be incurring additional costs because they, you know, they've got something that works already, so they're replacing that. So I think the people who participate in the study might deserve a little more support for their efforts. But I do, it shouldn't be a blanket, we're gonna give you $10,000 to try this. It should be somehow justified by their expenses and,
That is the crux of the political argument. If you say the politics is between the gung-ho proponents of UD, who are touting all the advantages, climate change, et cetera, resource recovery, low cost, versus the gung-ho UD opponents who say, no way is a significant number of people gonna put this in their house because they're worried about their real estate value. That's quite subjective and opinionated. And the proponents totally second what you just said and want that number to be as high as possible to encourage people to.
say that.
Well.
I did
excuse
not
me.
say that, Steve.
Sorry.
I said I said.
Some, no, excuse me, I'll separate, I withdraw the fact that you, like, any claims about what you said. The proponents would like to have that number as high as possible to encourage people to join, to publicize UDs and how good they are. The opponents wanted the number to be as realistic as possible so that the recruitment becomes a valid demographic measure of how many people would do this permanently, long-term. But your point shows that needs to be
Well, I think.
some bias
I-
toward the proponents.
Yeah, I'm not sure I would say that, I just think it's an entirely different thing. If I'm building a new house, and this is an acceptable IA, form of IA, that my expenses are very different than if I have an existing system. I'm gonna take a risk in replacing it with something that may or may not turn out to be approved. And, I think for that risk, they deserve a little more support. And then, if and when everyone is forced to upgrade to IAs,
when,
yeah,
when, it's a when.
then the equation certainly changes even more, changes again, right? But,
So, is this subsidy?
Hold on one second.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Ed had his hand up.
Yeah, I saw Ed, yeah.
It was a
Go
back and
ahead.
forth, and Ed didn't get to speak.
I was
yet.
trying to stay on topic, but go ahead.
The crux of the thing is, this is an existing technology. It works. other parts of the world are doing it. Other parts of the world have tried it and said, no, this doesn't work. Notably, Australia tried a pretty large-scale, 30-odd toilets installed in a development and found that the collected urine was too dilute because of the fixtures they used, so it wasn't a good fertilizer. They scrapped it, tore out the toilets, and put in conventional. Places in Europe are doing this on a pretty small but growing basis. The whole idea of contracts, and that's where the discussion started. The precedent is there in Falmouth. We did this as a town a dozen years ago or so with the Eco Toilet Program. Small subsidy, contracts, forgivable loan structure. The details are there. I don't think it makes a lot of sense, but it's not our decision as a committee. It's a recommendation and something that'll be discussed with town management and staff. Don't reinvent the wheel. Look at those existing contracts and go from that. The whole structure of that, and there was this 25-pound box of records from that Kristen gave me back when we formed a urine diversion working group. Steve, I think you'd have some fun looking at that because the history is immense. And we had a urine diversion working group. Our selectman was a member of that, myself, Tom, George. And we looked at this stuff and said, look, here are some basic guidelines based on our analysis and discussion of the MassTech proposal. We submitted that, presented it back in November to this committee. I think as part of this exercise, it may make sense for the committee to look at that and say, yes, we agree with this, and make that part of our mission directives and guidance and suggestions to town management. It was a one-page document, and gist of it was involving the subsidies, the format of a forgivable loan, so that if you got a subsidy, it was a forgivable loan, just as the original program a dozen years ago or so. If you completed the program, the loan was 100% forgiven. Bang. If you did not, you had to pay every dime back to the town. It was only given out based on submitted expenses. It wasn't, here, you got $5 grand or you got 10 grand. Right. You get reimbursed for your actual submitted invoices and expenses. The $10,000 figure came initially from MassTech. The working group looked at it, discussed it. We had, I personally had some discussions with licensed master electricians, plumbers rather, about what would be involved in hooking one toilet up. And it was up to $3,000. 2 men for a couple of days, and take a look at the labor rates, the math works, and then you gotta buy the device. The working group recommended that to qualify for the subsidy, thou shalt convert all your toilets. It's the only way you would ensure continuity of the use and provide meaningful data that might hopefully eventually be accepted by DEP. And it's the only way you'd get meaningful data. If somebody's just gonna use a QB, God bless them. They're taking nitrogen out of their septic system. The issue becomes, what are you gonna do with it? But it's not gonna give us meaningful data. So I don't think it makes sense for the town to do that. But, the $10,000 number has some facts behind it. It would only be for actual expenses. If you spent more, sorry. If you spent less, well, that's all you shall be reimbursed. But, I think a danger is to reinvent the wheel and spend so much time doing that this thing doesn't kick off for another year. And if you've got a year to make it go and 3 years minimum of data collection, you're 4 or 5 years down the road from fall town meeting before you've got something to submit to DEP. We had sent to DEP back a couple of months ago, maybe 3 months ago now, the MassTech revised proposal for the 4 years of data collection by 70 households, so that we'd end up with at least the 50 for 3 years. Part of that was the subsidies, all that was in the MassTech proposal, and then the one-page working group report. DEP's response has been deafening, dead silence.
Crickets.
I'm not gonna hold my breath waiting for a response. I think, you know, if politically it can be pushed with some of our legislators, maybe some folks that have some better contacts, but DEP is up to their neck in other issues, and I think it's an important program. I think it can make sense if the town voters decide to support it, to proceed with it. It is gonna provide some data that, on a larger scale than the existing programs that are out there in the world, it's pretty straightforward science. There's a lot of nitrogen in urine, and every pound of nitrogen you take out is a pound kept out of the estuaries. Making it work, sure. I think it makes sense conceptually to subsidize that should the town support it. Because, as Ken says, people are making a sacrifice. The guy with one bathroom, he's in 100%. If you get two or more, well, if you want a subsidy, you gotta convert them all. If you don't wanna convert them all, that's okay, but you're not gonna get town support. If you wanna use a QB, great. There was a program that went on for 2 months, collected about 1,000 gallons of urine. It was trucked away. I don't know why it stopped. It's a good idea. It can be used for other stuff. You gotta develop that marketplace, let's call it, of who's gonna haul it, where are they gonna haul it, what are they gonna do with it? And that should be part of this project. But there was no reason in my mind to, hey, why stop? If you're committed to this removal of urine and you wanna use a QB and put in a 50-gallon drum, do it. Don't stop, because it does work. You're not gonna give us TMDL credits, but you will be accomplishing your stated goal. I'm off my pulpit.
I have a
Okay,
question.
just 1 minute, I wanna stay on the contract. Corin, in the West Falmouth project, was there some form of contract that was provided to the homeowners?
Yes,
Could you manage to get a copy of it to us?
absolutely.
Thank you. That'd be useful. Thank you. Sorry, I didn't.
Could I also ask, how was, round numbers, dollars, what were the subsidies, how was that structured?
So the first, and Amy was also a part of this, so if you can jump in and help when I forget. The first phase of this was a grant from the Southeast New England, program.
Snap.
Yay. And it was for roughly $200,000. And we gave subsidies of $10,000 because that's roughly half the cost of the upgrade. So the homeowner was in for $10,000, we subsidized for $10,000. So that's how that was determined. At the time, the septic system tax credit was available, but it was at a much reduced rate, and it only applies to year-round primary residences who had a failed system. So those homeowners who had Title V systems that were not failed could not avail themselves of the septic system tax credit.
That was great. I just will remind everybody that we are recording all of this, so next time we get beyond just a one-word answer, you have to go to the,
We got a microphone.
yeah, there's a microphone here and here, either way, so.
Can I ask a question? to
You can,
Ed?
you just, that was the first one. You want to ask a second one?
The question is, Ed, you said without converting all the toilets to urine diversion, you think the data's not worth anything, and I'm wondering exactly why you feel that way.
You won't be getting all of the urine, you won't be maximizing the return on investment, and you won't have how would DEP interpret that? Well, somebody did one of their toilets, but we'll give you a TMDL credit of, a half a pound a year. Oh, this guy converted all his toilets, we'll give you 5 pounds a year of TMDL credit. The numbers won't be meaningful for our stated goal to get urine diversion accepted as an IA for general use. Without meaningful data, if you think DEP would take a long time with kind of flaky data, I'm gonna call it, they'll take forever. It will not happen in my lifetime, by any means, to get them to approve such a setup. I think to get the best data, and this was a consensus
I mean,
of the
clearly
working group.
clearly
that
it's
you need.
preferable to do them all, but I think it's a higher hurdle.
And I look at
So-
that as a commitment level. People say, well, gee, if you got 3, 4 toilets, it's a big expense. Yeah, and it's a big commitment. Well, how about the guy that's got one toilet? He's in 100%. He's all in. And I think they all should be.
Well,
Oh, time out.
Just a quick comment, I think the
Can,
50,
can you,
okay.
thank you, or that one, either one. Thank you.
Hey,
This is Doug Brown.
Doug Brown. So I think we agreed that the 50 people that are in the program should have converted all the toilets, so that information is solid. But certainly the other people that are just doing one, certainly we want to get that data too. I think that would be very useful and informative.
Yep.
So that's the peripheral group that we talked about.
Yes, we did. That's a very good point, Doug. That we said in our analysis of that we would subsidize by collecting the urine and analyzing it and making the initial evaluation of the condition of the septic system by, what is the content? We would do a pump out, and the pump out would be subsidized. It would be paid for by the town through this project. For those people that were gonna collect, we called it ancillary data. They weren't gonna do 100% conversion. They may not do any hard fixture. They may be doing cubies on a religious basis, keeping a diary, a log of utilization. The volume would be analyzed, quantity, quality, nitrogen content, et cetera, and hauled away when the drum is full. They would have to have a minimum, I forget, we said a 50-gallon storage drum, et cetera. So the logistics of that would have to be worked out. But that data, yes, you're right, Doug, we did, as a committee, a working group rather, say, yes, we would support those who wanted to participate but not to get fully subsidized. They would get a partial support to cover their expenses. Because again, to what Ken, I think, was saying is, it's important to gauge participation and help people that are willing to try, those who are going to be the pioneers to try and make this a go.
I'm gonna go down to Tom, who's been patiently trying to get in here.
well, actually, Ed did an absolutely super job from his pulpit down there of covering the points I was gonna try to make with the early ballot. But this was one point where Ed and Doug and I disagreed when we were getting this working group together. I see an enormous number of people that would be willing to say, I'll use a QB, or I'll convert one fixture at a cost of $3,000 or something, because we're gonna be monitoring the tanks. We know exactly how much stuff is being intercepted, and I would be very upset if we turned down 200 people that were willing to go in for $3,000 in the game and not have 50 people that were willing to do the full conversion. But it's,
So,
I think there's valuable data there. I agree with Ken and other people that we don't want to miss out on that. And one other point I want to make, did DEP say the participants had to have 100% conversion?
In order to get provisional use.
We don't know.
Well, that's what I'm asking.
we haven't heard that yet, but
We-
give.
That's
if I-
the
if I could jump-
elephant that isn't in the room is DEP.
Right.
I'm gonna jump in here, though. So there's a couple of different steps to where we're going. One is getting the concept of urine diversion to the point where it's acceptable.
Right.
That you can put a urine diversion device in. And then the second question becomes, what will the accounting side of it look like?
Yeah.
So it's quite conceivable that once you get through the first 50 homes in 3 years, that they'll say, okay, for every gallon of urine that you collect, you will get so many pounds. So then you could turn around and say, you don't have to convert all the fixtures in the house at that moment in time, as long as there's, as you say, a system that measures the amount of urine diverted. So you can say, these houses have X gallons each year diverted, and you start to build some type of, this is back to the responsible management entity issue for the regular IAs. How do you monitor how they're used or how they're working? And whatnot, I got you, okay? So, I think the first step is not to have a scatter shot of information necessarily, but once it's approved, setting up how, we've been basically utilizing, I believe, water consumption to determine pounds removed from sewering, using is it an 85 or 90% return rate, Kristen, something like that? 90. We don't necessarily have to have that exact same formula, so that should be part of the exercise over the next couple of years of, once we start going down this path, how do we determine, this is where I think that second meter, they've talked about going in on some of these homes to measure the water, that might have to be metered to just the urine diversion devices. Okay, I'm gonna hold because we've got, Hildy wants to say something. We've heard from everybody on this board at least once. We've heard from Doug at least once. Corin. Amy's been quite silent on this issue, but she'll get her chance.
Hilda
And Ed, I got you.
He's just taking it.
Hilda Menge from the Green Center. A quick one about not being so negative about Mass DEP maybe acting, because what we have learned from the last eco-toilet program, as well as what Heufelder said recently, we get results back really quick. Because in the last program, the effluent went, the nitrogen and phosphate went boop, and then it stayed stable. This is a very simple technology. It's not like an IA, which the technology is pretty complicated, and it's a biological system, and it takes a lot of work, and it's not always the same. This is very stable. So he thinks that within half a year or a year, we already basically have all the data. Now, Mass DEP might require 3 years, but we already have something where we can tell Mass DEP that if this happens, if this stays like this, would you? So that's one thing that I wanted to mention. In the last program, having people to divert or having to change all the toilets was the failure.
Right, that's what I
And
think.
there's no, as far as I know, understand also from the QB project that we did, there's really no need for it. What Mass DEP required, this is my understanding, is the difference between the effluent before we get a fixture and the effluent after. And if you can show a certain amount of degree, if this house only has 4 toilets, but they only converted 1, and their nitrogen went down, say 80%, they get that much credit. And that has been monitored every year. And if people suddenly show that their nitrogen levels go up, that means they're not diverting it, then they have to change something. But I think it's the difference between before and after that should be measured, not the number of toilets. Because when we did that other program, we had some people with 2, of course many with 2, some with 3, some with 4 toilets. They hardly ever use 2 of them. They use mostly 1. And if they know that they're gonna have to pay something if their effluent is not staying that level of nitrogen reduction, then they'll make sure that they're gonna use that toilet, or they have to pay. And that's the kind of program I like to see, because it's not gonna work, from our last experience, to have all toilets changed. Another thing is that, another point is, I don't think we need more than 50 people. And the reason is, in the last program, nobody dropped out once they were in. If anybody drops out, then you start 1 more person later, and the program will be a little later. But that doesn't really matter because you're already getting a lot of data. And the cost of doing another 25 is huge. It's $250,000. So why put that in if you can just do 50 people, if you can get 50? And then if somebody happens to drop out, they have to pay everything back, including all the testing, whatever. And then you add that 1 other person that's on the waiting list, or 1 more person that's only part-time.
Just one quick point, if we'll accept partial conversions, suddenly it's not $250,000 to have 25 more families, right? It might be a tiny fraction of that, because they're not gonna get back more than they can demonstrate they put in. And again, I think that's a very good reason to cast a broad net.
Yep.
Because, and also, John can correct me on this, but I think, don't IAs have to be monitored quarterly?
It depends. They can be monitored quarterly to start with, and if the results are good, you can back off.
You can back off, but see, again, you mentioned every year, but I think initially,
Yeah, do it 4 times.
we're going to look for quarterly monitoring, and we developed a program before where it was done randomly on a quarterly basis.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
Remember the formula we developed? So I think that if we don't accept partial conversions, we're gonna give up a golden opportunity to determine the level of public participation and get a more, what do I wanna call it, a more valid data set.
Yes.
A more realistic data set.
Also, you learn a lot more, because if somebody puts in one urine diverting toilet, and they get, say, 80% reduction of their nitrogen level in the effluent, and the next person only use a male urinal, you get another number. And it's really valuable to learn that. Because what if, say, getting all the male urine out with a urinal, and that takes, let's say, 40, 50%. Then you can extrapolate over a whole watershed. What if we did this? If we only stick to all toilets, and it has to be then all flush toilets that use a lot of water, that gets the same problems, we don't learn as much. And I think it's so valuable to have all these different systems. And you can even, I would like to see 10 people that do nothing, which is of course everybody. 5 or 10 people, I know at least 5, that have diverted all their human waste, urine and feces. So you have the extremes of what you could achieve and what you didn't achieve. And then see what happens in between with the different systems, so that eventually you can say, if we did this over a watershed, even if it's not Falmouth or West Falmouth, wherever, then we can achieve this, and then we need X number of more houses on sewers or whatever, IAs or whatever we have to do. I think it would be much more valuable.
So, for me, the real sticking point here is, what is DEP
I know.
going to accept or allow? And as I've said a couple times so far, the town's on the cusp of a memorandum of understanding with the test center. And the test center is gonna be the point on this particular question. So we all have our opinions, we all have our viewpoints on this. We'll see where it falls out. I'm cautioning everybody that that it should go one way, but it might not. As you point out, the last time we did all of this, the DEP was a little bit draconian.
Yeah.
Okay, if that's a usable
But-
word here.
But I still think that the DEP is looking at the reduction of the nitrogen levels in the effluent. And that is what they want to see. They want to see an X number of milliliters, grams per liter of the nitrogen. And that's what we look at, not how many toilets, not even if all the urine is collected. And that's another crook. Incinerators are already approved. You can be put in tomorrow. You're diverting the urine, and all you have to look at is the effluent before and the effluent after. What did you achieve with the water measurements?
I'll reflect back. Tom's been closely involved with some of the aquaculture. One can say, if you look at the aquaculture, every 100 pounds, we're getting rid of so many pounds of nitrogen. The DEP says, for every 100 pounds you give, we're only gonna let you do this. So there's still that
I know.
that disconnect going on with their accounting system. But I hold to the ultimate goal is to see an improvement in water quality.
Yes,
Okay,
exactly.
so, I just want to check if anybody on the board said their hands up a couple times, but, who else?
There was a woman in the audience right there.
You want?
Question?
Hi, just a quick comment about that.
Doug Brown,
Doug
again, once
Brown,
more.
so, I was involved with that as a contractor at the time to go around with the guy with the composting toilets. And back then, the focus really was on the composting toilets. That's very difficult to do in some second-story houses. It was, it's convoluted, giant pipe coming down through the ceiling. So that's why that was not very practical. Urine diversion is gonna be different, because now you're just running a small tube, you open up one bay in a wall, it's probably gonna be a lot easier to do. The other thing is, I believe there was only like 12 people that actually participated in that, and then 3 of them did take them out?
Afterwards.
Right.
Also,
Oh,
You can come back.
sure, there's yeah, come on up.
I was pretty closely involved in that program. So people could choose, we had a whole array of different toilets, people could choose what they wanted, and we advised them. And some people said, I decided on the Sunmore, or whatever it is. And I said, not a good system, but if you want to do it, that would be great, because then we all get the experience and we find out that it may be a really good system, or indeed it wasn't a good system. So the people that finally took it out were the toilets that we told them ahead of time, that wasn't good, but thank you for trying it, because we all learned from that. Other people like us, we still have our system, you know, and many people do. But
And the other point I was gonna make is, it's already determined that if we use all the toilets in the house, we're only probably gonna get 70 or 80% of the urine. I'm not sure exactly what the number was, but it was a large percentage, but not 100%. And then if we're gonna only do one toilet, we hope for good success, but we can't be sure what the result's gonna be. And we're gonna invest a lot of money and time and effort into this 3-year project, and to have the data compromised by a bad decision to allow just one toilet to be in our main group, I think we'll be regretting that when the 3 years is up, because then we're gonna go to DEP with numbers that aren't as good as what they could be. I think the ultimate goal is to have the best numbers possible, so when the study's complete, we can get onto general use.
Doug, let me point out to you, though, that we may have a set of really good numbers by asking for complete conversion in the household, but we may have a program that will never be acceptable to the broad public in Falmouth. Picture a couple that has a house, and every summer, the parent of one of the inhabitants comes to stay for a month. And of course, there's a bathroom upstairs, a toilet and everything for them upstairs. Now, are those people gonna wanna spend the extra $3,000 or $5,000 to convert that upstairs bathroom? They're not gonna shut it off because mom isn't gonna wanna go up and down the stairs several times a day when she wants to use the facilities. I just think as a homeowner, if you had nowadays 3 and 4 toilets, bathrooms in a lot of houses, either full or half baths, that the expense of charging or costing the whole thing for 3 or 4 units that are only used 10 or 15 or 20% of the year is gonna be a deal breaker.
But let's see what happens.
Yeah, well,
If we don't get the numbers of people, then we can
Yeah.
revise the program.
Yeah, I just think if we have the opportunity to cast a really broad net, we need to do that.
well, in the urine diversion program that we did, we got 80% of their urine, which
Yep.
was pretty good, just with cubies, which is not the most convenient for most people.
Right.
I'm gonna
And-
cut the argument back and forth,
Yes.
discussion back and forth. There's a woman out here who had her hand up, and we've not heard from her yet, so we'll give her the microphone.
Lucinda Keith, and I was part of the study, and after the study finished, I continued with the study, and there are other people that have continued using their cubies and pouring it into the
Good.
50 gallons. My main objective is to make sure that the waters are clean. I live right on Jenkins Pond, so that's my priority. All the letters and all the numbers are important, I know, for all of you, but my main focus is for the pond. I right now have 3 bathrooms in my home. Once a month, I have it on my phone to go and flush the toilets of the other 2 because they're never used. So for me, I would like to see a different group of people that could convert all of them, be it 1, 2, or 3, if they truly use them. But then for someone like me, I want to do my part and I want to be included. But for me to do something to all 3 toilets, they never get used.
Yep.
And when people come to my house, when I was participating in the urine diversion with the QB, I had the fancy one that you sit down, I told my guests that that was what they needed to do, and so they came and they used mine. So it can be done if you really want to do it. And I understand what your procedures are and what you have to follow, but me personally, that's what I would do. Thank you.
Earl?
Thank you.
Earl, you have your hands up.
I have a short thing. One idea that hasn't,
Wait, let's talk, wait till you get to the microphone. There you go.
Earl Barnhart, Green Center, one idea that hasn't come up is you disable a toilet. If someone has 3, they say, we never use the top 2, we'll switch the bottom one, disable the top ones.
Steve Layton.
Hilda is correct. They did a survey, and they published it, and she just admitted the fact that if we demand all the toilets, we're never gonna get the 50 people. Now, if you're an opponent, you can say, fine, we not only saved the 1.9 million, we saved the 80K, done, we have the answer, no UDs. But I don't think very many people are gonna be happy with that. The other way is, and I credit Kim Comart with telling me this, but Hilda and Earl also just mentioned it, and somebody else too, is monitoring the effluent from the septic tank. In other words, treating this as a special case of IA, which is what we intend to call it. And if monitoring those quarterly is good enough for an IA, a traditional IA, it should, in principle, be good enough for urine diversion. The catch is that when we were working on the responsible management entity, the cost of that monitoring, as required by DEP, was large enough to be frightening to the people who were advocating for traditional IAs. If it was large enough in that context, it would be even larger proportionately to the much less expensive UDs, because it's the same monitoring. But if there's a cheaper way, it will be of interest to any kind of IA. So,
Well, just hold for 1 second. Further comments off the board, John?
Ken,
I didn't know if John hasn't chimed in yet. I was gonna give him an opportunity to say what he's
I'm
thinking.
fine.
but if Hilda knows why I'm wrong, I want to hear
Are you
it.
sure? Forget about that. You good? You wanna talk? Tom?
no, not
Okay.
me.
Hilda? Some weak hands up here. People do this every once in a while. I think they're about to say something.
My exercise here. No, it's not monitoring an IA system is very different from taking a sample out of the effluent, which is just taking the sample and getting it to the lab from the effluent, which is very different than figuring out an IA system, which is very complicated. So the testing we did for the eco-toilets was it monthly for a while? It was very often. I think most likely a test like that would cost about total nitrogen and phosphorus and scooping it up probably about between $77 and $100. Because that's what they charged with the urine diversion. And that's what I heard that approximately might
But
cost.
quarterly, that's 400 a year, which was frightening to the IA people.
What?
I was just an audience to that. I wasn't participating in it. And so I think you and I agree that whatever the monitoring is, it would be the same for a traditional IA or for a urine diversion. It would be in the Title V septic system that you still have to have in both cases. And the monitoring would be the same, and the cost of it would be the same.
I'm gonna try. So I think what you're sort of saying, Steve, is before you put the urine diversion in, if you sample the effluent of the septic tank,
Yeah, that's what
it's gonna say that there's someplace between 50 and 90 milligrams per liter of total nitrogen. And if we divert all that nitrogen away and you measure that tank, the total nitrogen coming out of the septic tank should be 8, 10, 12. Is that what you're saying? What you say, measure what comes out of the tank, what do you measure?
I don't want to get in over my head. All I'm saying is,
Particularly in that tank.
you have two different ways of removing
Into
nitrogen.
the tank? over your head?
Either at the toilet through urine diversion into a tank, or with wood chip or similar technology in a tank in the ground. In both cases, you then have effluent going on to your leaching field, which is the problem. And in the case of traditional IAs, there is a way of monitoring that. It would be the same for this.
You missed my point here. I'm gonna try it one more time.
Okay.
Because I think you might be on to something. I'm trying to understand what you're proposing to see how valid it might be, okay?
Okay.
The Board of Health turns around and says, thou shalt put an IA system in. And you will monitor it 4 times a year, and you measure at the D box, typically going out to the leaching field.
Right.
The system has a performance standard, 19, 12, or whatever the number is. So you measure the TKN, okay? And you get a value. If we turn around and we say, okay, you put one urine diversion toilet into your house, because that's all you feel like doing, okay? But you're gonna use it 80% of the time. Somebody can do the math a little bit and say, then that means that what should be coming out of the septic tank is not gonna be 65, which is what you get if you don't have an IA system. If you just run wastewater through a septic tank, and you measure at the D-box, you're gonna measure numbers in the 60s and 70s coming out at the D-box, okay? That's a fact. That's not a question.
I think I see where you're going.
Okay?
Yeah.
So if somebody puts a urine diversion in, the expectation is that what comes out of their septic tank to the D-box is now gonna be 10 or 14 or whatever the number's gonna be. That's one way to look at it, and then to sample quarterly to see that people are utilizing their urine diversion.
You get into a lot of technicalities, because, for instance, they're also using less water, so the
Right, so
concentration.
that's, so,
have
but
to do
you,
that.
you have the water use.
You got the water use, you turn it into
So you're
gallons.
getting around to the point that I was trying to raise with that initially. I said, why is the data not useful if you haven't converted all? Because it depends on what you're monitoring. If the only thing you're monitoring is the value of nitrogen in the urine you produce, that's not sufficient. You have to also monitor what's coming through the D-box, and you need to know water use and concentration. And if you see, so with those two numbers, you can see the total load through the septic system has declined by X%, and it would be also valuable to know how much nitrogen was in the urine that you trucked away. And that's your monitoring program. It's pretty simple.
It is if I may,
I'm gonna hold on a second, because Corin's had her hand up. She wants to jump in here on it, okay?
Corin Peterson, Buzzards Bay Coalition. I'm so sorry to add a wrinkle to this really great discussion, but, so Steve, you laid out how we're monitoring IA systems. You monitor the D-box or the pump chamber, so the last part of the system before it goes out to your leach field, because that's what we care about, the treated effluent. If you're just doing one conversion, if you have 3 bathrooms, you only convert one, you would monitor the same. You want to know the concentration of the total nitrogen coming out of there. What you're depending on is the behavior of that family in that house at that time. So if that house sells, maybe they're using all of the bathrooms frequently, and so that concentration at that D-box is going to change. Do you see what I'm saying? So you could have a family that says, we're gonna convert one and we're gonna use that bathroom, we're not gonna use these 2 bathrooms, because they're good people, they wanna do the right thing by the estuary. But then they sell the home and you have a new family come in and they're using all of the bathrooms. So then it becomes incumbent on the town to make sure that that concentration in that D-box hasn't changed, because DEP is gonna hold the town, if the town wants to use IA system, urine diversion systems, they're gonna hold the town to whatever nitrogen standard the urine diversion systems are going to achieve. Am I making my
No,
point?
you're making your point, but I would counter to that.
Okay.
That at some point when the DEP finally turns around and says whatever, they're not gonna give you 100% of whatever we see in the data set. They're gonna give you a lower number that will become the basis for how you determine how many of these are worth what, so that there's a safety factor, a buffer. So somebody could have a house with 6 people living in it and sell it to somebody with, now there's only 2. So-
It can happen,
so-
it can happen either way.
I could-
It's just something to think about when you're thinking about what kind of nitrogen credit you're gonna get from a urine diversion. If you're not requiring all of the toilets to be
I
converted.
assume that, as with traditional IAs, you're committing to monitoring at some frequency
Right.
indefinitely into the
Twice a
future,
year.
and all future owners.
Twice a year.
Right.
It's
there's-
required, it's on their deed. They're
Yeah.
required to have a
There's
contract and
performance
monitor.
standards,
Yeah.
and you have to meet those.
But they don't.
Well, the town has to be willing to be hard-nosed.
No, what his point is, the current DEP-approved IA systems don't perform at the level for which they're approved.
And also the homeowners sometimes just stop paying for the testing and don't do
Yeah,
it.
but the Board of Health calls them up. I sat on the Board of Health.
Very hard to enforce.
Huh?
Very hard to enforce.
The Board of Health went through an exercise about 4 or 5 years ago of putting some teeth into our regulations.
No, I think the Board of Health has that under control now.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's why, thank you, John. We realized that there was a real issue there when I was sitting on the Board of Health, and we changed the stuff to say, you don't just report what you have. If you report it doesn't work, you gotta go make it work, and/or continue to do additional monitoring, raise the price up. And we had a list of, I can't remember how many homes we sent out notices, and they came before us, Doug.
And to the
Thank you,
extent,
Corin.
to the extent that you worry about non-enforcement, that applies to traditional IAs as well.
As well, yeah. It's
That's
across
what I'm
the board.
talking about, actually.
And you have to think about possible gaming of the system, which I've thought of a way to do, but I won't mention it here.
So to that point, I think there's two things going on here. One is, what do we have to do to convince DEP that this might work? A second would be, what would DEP then say homeowners have to do to get, for this to be viable? To convince DEP that could work, in terms of sort of preliminary study, again, I think if you have 5 bathrooms and you only use 2 and you only want to pay to convert 2, and you can demonstrate that worked, that's evidence towards the general approval.
Penzance Point is not in a nitrogen impaired district, so I don't know how we're gonna get 5
I'm just saying,
bathrooms.
I'm just making up a number, but you know what I'm saying. So, but that's evidence that it can work. And then, if DEP then comes back and says, we're only gonna give you credit if you convert if all the bathrooms in the house are converted, that's a separate thing. That's, okay, now for our routine regulation, this is what we're gonna require. And, okay, I'm good with that. But I just saying, in this early phase of trying to get proof of concept, maybe we don't wanna make everybody convert every toilet.
Right.
For something that we're not even sure is gonna finally, in the end, turn out to be viable.
So is it the sense of this board that we wanna tell the DEP that people don't have to convert all their toilets, they can only convert what they feel
It's
like
the sense
converting?
what I'm saying is, let's convince DEP they can get significant reductions in nitrogen using this strategy. What do we need to do that?
That's Mass Tech.
That's the
Do
Jenkins
we wanna
Pond
direct
approach.
Mass Tech?
Yeah,
I'm gonna wait till you give me a chance.
that's
to
it,
speak.
I'm done.
This is Doug Brown again.
Can I just speculate that DEP is probably gonna say, it's your program, if you wanna do that, go ahead. It's your numbers that you're gonna jeopardize. I don't think DEP is gonna really tell us exactly how to run our own program. They're gonna just say, do what you want, but we're gonna be looking at the results. That's my guess.
I think Doug is right. In fact, if DEP officially comes out with relatively lenient standards, and we use them, and then we don't meet the TMDLs, we don't fit the central station, we're not, it's in the document somewhere, it's on us. We cannot say, well, you told us we could do this lenient approach. And they're perfectly in their rights to say, yes, we told you we're stupid, you're supposed to be smart, it's up to you.
Yeah, it's okay to fail. Go ahead.
Big picture here. We get to the point for a watershed, and we make a determination that within this watershed, if you're not in the area sewered, anybody within, I'm gonna just throw a random number out there, 400 feet of the water body has to convert to an IA over a certain fixed period of time. We're monitoring on a yearly basis, reporting on a 5-year basis. If at the end of a 10-year period, we don't see enough improvement in water quality, okay? We have to come back and say, all right, now anybody within 600 feet or 700 feet, the issue's gonna be, when we do these watershed management plans, are we gonna turn around and say, we think 300 feet's gonna work? And go for it and see what happens. Or we're gonna say, let's go for 400 because we know we got a better chance of making it, or are we gonna start at the 300, knowing that we have to come back every once in a while? Some watersheds may work, some watersheds might not. Okay, so it's the same thing with urine diversion. If it turns out people put urine diversion in, and at the end of the day, we're not making the TMDL, we have to expand the area that it's gotta go into.
But what if you have a difference between the efficacy of urine diversion and IAs?
Why do I care? I just have to expand the area.
Yes, the new people, you go into that new area, if you specify, let's just call them approach A and approach B. Now that you know that approach A has not been working out really well, you go into this next 100 feet, you'd be crazy not to insist on approach B. And those people are having to do that because of the people who did
You have
A
a major
first.
fallacy going on right here. Your presumption is that urine diversion, in terms of nitrogen reduction, and an IA that we're seeing them running at the 10 or less, in terms of nitrogen reduction, that there's a substantive difference at the end of the day in that. I would contend that at the end of the day, urine diversion is going to be in the category of a 10 milligram per liter properly functioning IA. Might be a little better, might be a little worse, depending upon how you use your toilets in the house. So when we defined a zone where you have to put an IA in, we're not going to say, you know, I don't see us distinguishing between urine diversion or, you know, the recirculating biofilters or anything else. We're going to say, these are the IA systems, these are what's approved by the DEP, you shall convert it within this period of time. And again, we're going to be managing. If it turns out that in one estuary, 100% of the people put urine diversion in, and boom, we're hitting the number because we're getting more than down to 10 milligrams per liter of the number, then we adjust every 5 or 10 years what we're doing.
Can I throw in one more thing?
Steve, can I just?
John hasn't spoken yet.
We're
so-
drifting away from our actual chore of designing this pilot program. We're talking about all the exceptions that may occur down the road. Let's get on with getting to Mass Tech a program that we think will give us meaningful data that we can present to DEP. And I think Ed has outlined what the subcommittee has suggested. I think that should be our blueprint to give to Mass Tech and for them to then finally design the program. They've got a slug of money from the town to hire a project manager to begin. I mean, there's no sense ands and ifs and buts. If we can't get 50, let the fellow go out and talk to the people and let's see what we can sign up and get on with it.
Agreed. Can I make one more point before we get off this subject?
Absolutely. Well, we got all night.
The one last thing I would like, I'm still Doug Brown. One last thing I would like to say is, I wonder if we should consider identifying anybody that's within, say, 400 feet of a freshwater body, and if they convert all their toilets, that we pay the full cost as an incentive. Because then we're gonna target people that are gonna be really helpful, and, you know, it'll be more permanent. Because if we got somebody that's in a, like where I live in North Falmouth, I'm sort of in a watershed, but it's not really a priority.
No, that,
We might end up
make a valid point. You know, if your conversion is of more immediate benefit, you know, yeah.
And maybe we could pay a little more,
You
and
could-
that'll
you could
incentivize
wait-
more
you could
people
wait
to
it.
get into this full-scale
You could wait,
program.
okay. All right, you brought this item on, Steve. Have you got it?
Let me just request that everyone study this document. If you didn't get a copy of it,
Good document.
ask Kristen to send you one, or me, and send me all your ideas, including especially things that haven't been discussed tonight that might be in the outline somewhere. And we'll keep going, and thank you very much for everybody.
All right.
All right.
Mr. Chair, this closes discussion, this agenda item?
You can talk. I'll recognize
Well, I was
you.
just gonna suggest disrupting the agenda because we've got time constraints on the delivery of our annual report. And given that we've
Are
already,
you making a motion to take up item,
whatever number it is,
Four.
yes. I was gonna suggest, I wasn't making a motion.
You can make a motion.
So anyway, I'll move then that we do the annual report next to make sure that we've got it done before the close of business today.
I second that, and I move that we approve it as written, except for the typos that I sent to Kristen and Steve.
Just hold
problem is,
tight
Steve,
for 1 second. So I received comments, I received some sort of format, a couple of small formatting things from Ken. And I got your several edits as well, okay? Which I've already cut in, but none of what you did or he did.
Yeah,
Big
mine were just
changes to the
typos.
substance of, so the first thing is there, I would ask this, Is there a subject matter, so for those of you that don't have this yet, you're just standing out there in Never Land. Diane Davidson sent out an email, what, a week ago? And
You
said,
sent it to me Sunday.
huh?
You sent it to me Sunday.
Yeah, well, yeah. I'm giving the benefit of the doubt that it came a week ago. It said that we are on the agenda on the 20th, I think, to make a 50-minute presentation per the town's charter and the rules, that we have to annually report what we're doing. And said that whatever we were going to have, our annual report had to be in by the 13th. So that put it on kind of a short timeline here. So I worked from what has gone on in the past, and I set it up to say, just a quick thing, what's the committee? Then I talked about watershed permit planning, because that was a big item in the last year. Talked about shellfish aquaculture and where that's at. Talked about permeable reactive barriers. Talked about urine diversion's potential to be an approved IA option. Talked about disposal of treated effluent through an outfall to Vineyard Sound. Talked about the Tassa area sewer expansion, the Little Pond sewer area water quality monitoring, fertilizer reduction, and then define the committee's meeting schedule. If there is a specific subject or topic that I failed to include, I need to know so I can create something.
No, I think you did a great job.
Okay.
That's my opinion, but I don't know what the,
Your opinion is valuable, since you're the sort of scribe of the
Well,
board at this point.
you want to just,
I'm willing to go through it.
oh, I don't want to go, I
I
think,
already
No.
moved to accept
I
it.
can
Does
stay
anybody not
afterwards.
want to accept it?
I mean,
You don't have a second yet, so.
Well, I found 3 typos. Anybody's interested in those?
Go ahead.
Well,
We'll see if we already found them.
should I stay just a few minutes after our meeting here and just hand you this and,
You got a markup?
well, yeah, I've got several pages of markup, but it's bits and pieces, little things,
Yep, however you want to do it.
yeah.
You want to read them, and I'll cut them in here, do whatever you want to do.
Let's talk after the meeting, right? Be more efficient use of people's time.
John, what do you got?
I have 3 things in the paragraph on the outfall.
Yes,
4th line
Hold
down,
on,
it's-
I got it, my fingers don't work as fast as you can read. Go ahead.
4th line down, extend should be extent,
yes, we have
I'll
that.
pick that up, somebody else got that.
okay? Eelgrass, and I would put coverage, and then the next
Hold on,
line.
hold on, Ian. Eelgrass
Coverage.
coverage,
Yeah,
okay?
And then the next line, scratch the at and start with the.
Default 2023 town meeting
yes,
appropriations.
I got
Got
that
that
too,
one.
yeah.
Yep, that's
Yeah.
already been picked
That
up,
was the extent of my,
okay? Thank you, John. Ed, speed reading, I can see him.
No.
See your eyes going
No,
back
I
and
was
forth.
catching up on John's. The only thing I saw is in the next to last paragraph about a townwide fertilizer following the examples. I think it was a townwide fertilizer ban.
Added the word ban already, somebody
Yeah,
else picked
so
it up.
that's all I had.
You got it,
Otherwise, it
thank
was
you.
excellent.
Okay, excellent. Doug, help me out here. Am I supposed to have slides for this? This gets into your package, then do I just talk to it? Do I read it?
It's up to you, whatever you want to do. I mean, slides are great if you have a few.
I might throw together,
You can bring this little thing that is in the packet here.
Do you need a vote approving it?
we're gonna get there. We're gonna get there. So Kristen, if you can, maybe one slide for each one of these, just the big picture?
Bullets.
Like, under the first one, just where the watersheds are or whatever, and I can talk to what we've been doing. Go ahead. Ken, do you have some?
bullets. I just was saying bullets.
Yeah, I don't want to have much. I don't want to, just, a little graphic, okay. There's a motion. Go ahead, Tom. Do you want to say
Let's
something?
you and I just talk afterwards.
Assuming that Tom's edits will be grammatical and not substantive, I move that we approve it as you talk it over with him afterwards.
There's been a motion moved and seconded. Is any further comment? Any comment from the universe of people? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Thank you, folks. Okay. In the interest, again, of not, we're doing okay on time, but I would entertain a motion to do item 3 next, out of order, which is John's report on the outfall.
That's returning to them.
Well, item 2 we're skipping over momentarily. Does anybody want to make a motion to go to item 3?
So moved.
Okay?
Seconded.
Okay. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Thank you. All right, John.
So, we had a meeting with a bunch of the regulators, somewhere between 30 and 40 people were on the call last Tuesday with all of the groups interested in outfall. And I think from Amy's purpose, Amy and Anastasia from GHD, the point was to present to the regulators the fact that we had had previous meetings with them, just discussing the concept of an outfall. I think the point here was to say, we are actively pursuing an application for a permit for an outfall at Kite Park. And there are three major pieces of evaluation that we need to do. And just to go back historically, in collaboration with the coalition, in 2014, we got the Ocean Sanctuaries Act changed, which allowed for municipalities to use an outfall provided they were treating their effluent to tertiary treatment. So the town now this meeting was to focus specifically on one of the three areas of an application. And you can see there's the list directly from the Ocean Sanctuaries Act of the things, the check things that you would need to do to have a successful application. We have embarked on the impacts on the physics of the receiving water. Jim Churchill from the Oceanographic has run models for both Buzzards Bay and along the south shore of Vineyard Sound. We initially were attracted to Buzzards Bay because it was a shorter distance to the water body, but once we discovered that the flushing was much less and that we were going to have to horizontally drill through a moraine, we shifted our emphasis to the southern coast, where we're in the outwash plain and would be much easier, we think, to horizontally drill. So those studies are well underway. The town has also led a contract with USGS to examine the hydrology of the Sagamore lens to determine whether, if we were to use an outfall, what impacts we might have on the recharge of that sole source aquifer. That contract is let, and we're about to begin to get reports back from them. So what this meeting was specifically addressed to do was to look at the characteristics and the monitoring that we needed to do on the receiving body itself. And there's a list, again, it's section 5 in there, that is the things that we need to do and monitor for 2 years in advance of putting in an application. And Kristen, could you go to the second slide?
Yeah.
The most critical of all of that is where the eelgrass beds are. And traditionally, eelgrass beds were surveyed aerially and then verified by actually putting divers in the water. And there have been technologies using AUVs at the Oceanographic, which drastically improve the technology that's available to us. So last year in 2022, Scott Gallagher used his AUV with side scan sonar and photographs to go and do that grid off Kite Park. And he will be repeating that, and that's a major part of what we'll be doing. And if we can go to the next slide. This is just to show that Jim Churchill, also at the Oceanographic, has been responsible for modeling the mixing and transport off of Kite Park. The currents through there are fairly dramatic, and his model units are about 300 feet in diameter. And within one or two of those units away from the diffuser, you will not technically be able to measure our effluent. It just, the dilution rates are that high. And then finally, in addition to doing the eelgrass surveys, the other things which we've contracted through the coalition and through Scott Gallagher's company and Jim Churchill are to look at an evaluation of the fisheries resources, benthic sediments and in-fauna assessment, and mapping fisheries habitat, including eelgrass. And the coalition has put a buoy off of Kite Park and will be monitoring the nutrients for us. So those are all the things, and so those are the things here that we presented to the regulators last Tuesday, and specifically asked them within a couple of weeks if they found things that they thought we should change about our monitoring program, that they should let us know so that we can include them, because we intend to begin monitoring in earnest for that 2-year period beginning this summer.
Did they give you a deadline on a response?
We gave them 2 weeks.
No,
Did they agree to
No,
that?
hold on one second. I'm gonna let Amy get up to the microphone if I can. Because Amy helped through GHD to really set up this meeting and maybe describe the attitude or the response of people.
Amy Lowell, wastewater superintendent. Thank you, John. That's a very good summary of the meeting. As John said, there were about 40 people on the meeting, including people from the Environmental Protection Agency, the Department of Environmental Protection, Coastal Zone Management, Division of Marine Fisheries, Cape Cod Commission, MEPA, Massachusetts Environmental Policy Act Office. It was everybody, almost all of the regulatory agencies that will ultimately be involved in this. And we started by presenting why we're talking about an outfall and why this has become so essential to the town's wastewater planning. And then, as John said, explain the work that's already been done on a number of fronts, and then really focused on the work that we plan to do next. And we were soliciting feedback on what we plan to do next, because obviously we don't want to get 2 years down the road and hear that the regulators wish we had done it a different way. So we did ask for comments within 2 weeks, but we also have set up some follow-up meetings with specific groups of people who have a specific interest. So for example, there are a number of regulators who are very interested in the details of the eelgrass survey. And so there will be regulators going to Scott Gallagher's office in Woods Hole and looking at his existing survey data and how he does his work. And we're also providing them a written version of his scope for that work, so that they can comment not just on the presentation we made, but on the scope. We did get some very good feedback within the meeting, and we expect to get that additional feedback over the next few weeks. One of the big things that was pointed out was that we should have a control site. We were focusing on an eelgrass and benthic survey in the vicinity of our planned outfall site, and it was pointed out that we should have an additional site that is not in the vicinity of our outfall, so that we can long-term compare the condition of those two locations. So that's an example of some very good feedback we already received from the regulators, and we will be proceeding. The one other thing I wanted to mention is that we also let them know that we'll be doing marine soil borings off of in the vicinity of our proposed outfall this fall. We had maybe you already mentioned, I can't remember. This was before the Conservation Commission a week or 2 weeks ago, I think, and we received a negative determination from the Conservation Commission for those marine borings. That the negative determination means that they feel that it is not, we don't need to file a notice of intent under the Wetlands Protection Act. that decision goes to the Department of Environmental Protection, so they are aware as well of the marine borings that are coming up this fall. So there's a lot going on, and I really felt like we had the attention and interest and serious focus of the regulators at this meeting. The Leldon Langley of the Department of Environmental Protection really helped facilitate this meeting and bring in the regulators who he thought were applicable, and Todd, I'm not sure how to pronounce his name, Callahan or
I think it's
Callahan, yeah. With Coastal Zone Management has also really taken an interest in this project and in making sure it gets the appropriate review. So
I would offer, both of these individuals are very much engaged in what we're doing and understand our timetable and the advantages of keeping the thing moving. So I feel like we have internal advocates at the agencies. We also met at the EPA, thanks to the good arrangements of the Buzzards Bay Coalition setting that meeting up. And at the EPA level, they said, well, it's really a state project till you're ready to actually use it, and then we'll give you a permit. But in the meantime, they identified a person in their organization who was responsible for issuing permits to be on the sort of team, if you will, and track and dog what we're doing. But at that meeting with the EPA, we had representatives from, this woman is Senator Markey and Senator Warren and our local congressional delegation. So all of these folks are very much aware of what we're doing, why it's to the town's benefit, and I just feel like the last year we've done a bunch of stuff with the hydrodynamics and the first round of eelgrass mapping, but now we've moved into the real. Everybody understands this is what we need to do, why we wanted to get it done efficiently, why it's good, and they're on board to help us get there. I don't feel like I didn't sense any resistance from anybody in that call.
I didn't sense any resistance. I wouldn't say, nobody's voting yes, but they were very engaged, and they're going to review this project. We weren't getting votes of approval, but we definitely have serious engagement.
Steve?
Sure.
I think that's fantastic, and you guys deserve to be commended. It's a great job. I just had one technical thought from somebody who doesn't know anything about eelgrass, but I know something about data. From what John said about that theoretically it's undetectable a couple of mapping units away.
That's the currents.
Keep going.
Well, currents are detectable. You mean the concentration is not detectable?
The effluent.
The
Effluent is
Right.
below the level of
Right.
detection.
So any expected area of impact is small compared to the area that you're looking at anyway, the bigger area that you're surveying. I'm not opposed to a control area somewhere else, but to the extent that it's further away, it's sort of meaningless, because whatever happens between the two of them, you can say, well, hear me out.
Keep going.
I'm not saying not to do that, but there'll be a lot of hand waving about, oh, the difference was because blah, blah, blah over at Martha's Vineyard or the Elizabeth Islands or Hyannis, or to also consider simply the gradients within this big area that you're surveying before and after, because then all your other variables are held more nearly the same as your experimental area, which is very close to where the effluent is coming out most concentrated. But I defer to your experts, but I think they ought to think about that.
Steve, the point of that was eelgrass has come and gone. There have been, my mentor at the Oceanographic in the 1950s studied labyrinthia infections that wiped the eelgrass out completely for a while. The eelgrass has been
I mean, for
retreating.
the whole Massachusetts Bay,
The East Coast.
the whole East Coast.
So what DEP was suggesting was have a control site so that if once you turn on your outfall, we see some impact on our adjacent eelgrass bed, we can go to the control and say, that's retreated to the same extent as is adjacent to our outfall. Therefore, the outfall is not responsible.
Okay.
I think that was the point.
The-
The other, I thought, very interesting little snippet that came from the eelgrass discussion was, we had been wondering, without any indication in the Ocean Sanctuaries Act, how far outside of the eelgrass bed we would have to put our diffuser to keep the regulators happy. And they provided a number off the cuff of 75 meters, so they may change their mind, but at least we have a number.
So if we go for 100, we'll probably be safer.
Yeah, he does. Yeah, so we're already, at this point, for our sort of, where we're targeting a little bit, we think it's a solid 300 or 400 feet beyond the edge of the eelgrass already. You know, not 50 feet off the edge of the eelgrass, we're a ways away. Okay.
Looks great.
Exciting stuff.
Lauren, you had your hand up, did you want to?
Significant meeting.
Say what John said.
John said it?
Yep.
Okay, good, all right. So, we all like to get out of here at 6:30. You've got item 2 on the agenda for discussion of the IA systems?
Yeah, I don't think it'll take too long. Do you want me to do that now?
Yeah, as long as we have a chance to.
You,
I was gonna suggest, I've got like 4 or 5 things I just wanna pop through real quickly that are like kind of reports of members, if I can just do them quickly. Okay,
Okay.
so we don't run out of time.
you want to do that first?
Yeah, if I can.
Go ahead.
Okay, first off, I got a call from Kim before the meeting started. He got hung up between flights and traffic, and that's why he's not here. And he sends his apologies and hopes to get a complete update on all the discussions that we had. Down at Stony Brook on June 12th, in the past, we were told that there is a one-day exercise down there where they're gonna talk about various things having to do with this. I have signed up for it. I intend to drive down the day before, stay at the Holiday Inn, drive back the next day after staying at the Holiday Inn a second time. So if anybody decides they want to piggyback with me, track me down, I'll give you the information, okay?
Yeah, if you could just email me the agenda or whatever, the program.
Say the magic word, the duck comes down, you
Here
get
it is.
$100. I'll give it to you at the end of the meeting, okay?
All right.
Kristen managed to submit the 604 grant for the Magansett Rands Canal Fiddler's Cove watershed, and it's been acknowledged that it's been received. Good job, Kristen, on putting that all together. She did a lot of work. We did get a notice from the DEP that they accepted our notices of intent on all of the watersheds. So the program we've laid out, they've said that's a good program. Now,
The multi-watershed part of it.
multi-watersheds,
Good,
yep.
Good.
Yep. And that's all I have for just kind of like little tidbit items I wanted to be sure that people had.
Okay.
You're good?
Okay. I also had a small item first. Can I stick that in?
Go ahead.
At the last meeting, there was a really good infomercial by Paul Dombrowski of Isotech on permeable reactive barriers. And he was honest about the fact that the uncertainty in nitrogen return on investment can be as much as a factor of 40, which makes figuring out costs difficult. And Ed made a really good question/comment, the fact that engineering costs have to be included too. And so after the meeting, this is what no one else heard, just on a lark, I went up to Paul and I said, would your company give a fixed price quote on a PRB? And he said, yes, we do it all the time. And then I said, would you include a warranty on nitrogen removal? And he said, yes. And I was stunned, and so I thought, I'll get him on this one. Will he include a performance bond? If you don't know what that is, come ask me after the meeting. He said yes. That's a way a little company can be as reliable as a big company. Basically, it's an insurance policy a little company buys from a giant insurance company. And that, to me, it would be the only way for a town to do PRBs, if that's available. Now, it may turn out that then the cost comes out to be really large, but that's the most objective, ironclad way of knowing that the cost is really large, and that we shouldn't take the gamble, because towns aren't venture capitalists or startup companies. They don't get any benefit if they win. They only lose. And so I just think it's good to keep that in the back of our minds.
Thank you for that.
On to the other topic, is traditional IAs. You all got this thing circulated too. It may seem a long way off until Falmouth begins any substantial introduction of IAs. But I think it's important to realize that there's just one little company now that's Nitro E that's operating at the standards that we want. The owner of it recently had a stroke. His next stroke could kill him, as any of us could die tomorrow. Small companies go belly up all the time. There isn't a substantial industry. This isn't an argument for sewers or anything like that. I'm just saying, if you have a house built or you go to the store to buy bread, you're dealing with commodities, things that you can get from a whole bunch of sources. Just like urine diverting toilets, maybe you can get from different places. But right now, if there's only one place to get an IA, that's a fragile approach. And so the question is, how do you build that industry? And I submit it's by having one idea, I'm interested in other ideas, that some towns are doing, is saying new construction or within a certain distance that isn't in a sewer area to be sewered has to have an IA beginning now, or a substantial expansion. But something, so to signal, send a real signal to other potential competitors that there's a potential market out there, and then that builds the industry. The other obvious advantage of having other competitors is it brings the cost down. I just wanted to put that idea in people's heads. I don't expect action on it anytime soon.
At some point in the future, I expect that we will have a joint meeting with the Board of Health to discuss the mechanisms or some of the parameters about a Board of Health regulation that would require certain areas to, as you say, new construction. To the fact that there's only one, there's actually currently in Massachusetts 2 entities that are close to having the general approval. One of them is not working on the Cape right now because they're doing a lot of work in Rhode Island, as I've been told, or Connecticut. But the other one is, one of the reasons I'm heading down to Stony Brook is, I think his name was, I can't remember his name right now, but they've recently developed a similar system, but different. It's got its own tweak, and they've patented it to get down in the below 10 range. And they are looking at how to bring that into production as well. So there's several entities working on this, and I'm just pointing that out.
Right,
Okay?
but we need to move them into producing it and selling it. There's a big
Well,
difference.
demand
The
does
first
that.
step, this is, again, the stupid hurdle that we've got with, is the folks down there on Long Island would need to get 50 installations in Massachusetts to get it approved by the DEP for general use approval.
Right.
So part of it is finding out from them what they're willing to do and not, so. Steve, ahead.
There are, going through the DEP website, there's a half a dozen general use approved IAs now. The question is, how's their performance? One of them is our friend Mike McGrath's Ruck system is approved for general use since 2015 as an IA system. But the performance is all over the place. The most recent approval I found was BioClear, approved in July of 2020. The key is, how good is their performance? I think what you're saying, Steve, is the only one that's really doing outstanding performance is the one that was presented a couple of meetings ago.
Exactly.
The others aren't getting close to that number, but there are other systems. One of the things John mentioned a number of months ago was best available technology is required. So if these others that have been approved over the last 8 or 10 years aren't anywhere near 10 or less, then they're not the best available technology. And that's where you're down to just this one, maybe two. The question's gonna become, and I think this is something we've touched on a little bit, I think Amy even mentioned it a meeting or two ago. What are we gonna do, what are we gonna recommend as, because we're only an advisory committee, with those areas that are not gonna be sewered in the 25, 50-year horizon? Do we say, look, you're part of that impaired watershed, starting with new construction or substantial renovation, thou shalt put in best available IA technology. Tisbury's doing it on the vineyard now, to the tune of, I think it's something like 1,500 affected properties. Mashpee is doing it now, and interestingly, their distance from the water is not 300, it's 1,000. They've really gone way beyond what other communities are doing and what the state has been talking about. I think somewhere in the DEP stuff, it says about that 300 feet from the impaired estuary. But they've gone beyond, and I think, you know, Steve Rafferty, you mentioned it a little earlier in the discussion on your diversion. You know, we may say 300, but then we're gonna find that it's not enough, so we gotta go 400 or 500. I don't know why Mashpee went to 1,000, but this is a huge issue because these systems that are out there, traditional septic systems, Title V compliant though they may be, do not remove the nitrogen. That nitrogen is contributing to the problem. When will Falmouth say, you gotta start putting in IAs? The longer we wait, the more damage that shall be done. The ponds and estuaries aren't gonna get any better. And are we gonna say not just estuaries, but also those freshwater ponds? It's a huge issue, and it's very basic, because, you know, we're looking at 10, 20, 30-year horizons for sewering. That's gonna be a long time before we improve those. Should we start doing sooner those that we know will never get to sewer and start getting that, and take advantage of the fact that properties will be cycling and being rebuilt, and start getting those IAs in? The caveat I would raise is the track record is not very long. They're pushing to the 50 install base for 4 or 5 years, maybe 6 or 7 years with the nitro. That's not real long time. How will it go longer term? Hopefully very good. It looks incredibly promising, but will it sustain for 20 years?
That's another reason for starting slowly, rather than waiting till the last minute and then requiring a whole bunch of it.
So I think, that, you know, my position is, the sooner we require this, the better.
Yeah, we got your position. Gotcha.
Steve,
I got several hands out in the audience. Go ahead.
Can I just make one comment?
Yes.
So one of the things which the Board of Health has recently done is George has taken all the data for all of the installed IAs in Barnstable County. And we have developed a letter which each applicant for an IA must be shown by his engineer and must sign, saying that the engineer has presented him the data on the systems which are available and their performance in the county. So the client has to say, I've looked at what the nitro system can do and the fast system can do, and I've discussed it with my engineer, and I've decided to do X. And I can just tell you, George told me last Monday night, they approved 4 nitros.
Yeah.
So the engineers are getting the idea that in this town, we're pushing performance as hard as we can. Now, the other thing that I would suggest, that before we have a joint meeting with the Board of Health, is that we invite Brian Baumgartner to come and give us an update on the grant that they were given a year ago to develop a design for an RME. And I think that's absolutely critical. Until we have something that works there, which DEP will acquiesce to a monitoring program, then putting in massive numbers of IAs makes no sense. So I really think that's a prerequisite to us getting together with the Board of Health.
Now, John, if I can, you remember several years ago, we developed a whole boilerplate thing for the MRE and an algorithm of inspections that started off dense and then over time became spread out unless there was a failure, and then it.
That model has been given to Brian Baumgartler. He has it.
Oh, okay.
We gave him that as a basis to start with.
Okay, great.
The problem with that was, we sat down, George and I sat down, we came up with a monitoring scheme which we thought was affordable and relative. We discussed it with Brian Dudley at length and never got a signal from DEP that they were willing to buy into that reduced monitoring schedule. So that's the real challenge.
All right, we've got several people out here that want to talk. Corin had her hand up first. Then I think, Hilda, you might have had your hand up. And then Amy, you put yours up.
Corin Peterson, Buzzards Bay Coalition. So I want to underscore what Steve Layton said about new construction in areas that the town knows it's not going to sewer. Buzzards Bay communities, Westport, Marion, Wareham, you mentioned Tisbury, all have Board of Health regulations requiring new construction to install an IA system, period. New construction is the most affordable way to put in an IA system. The fact that we're still permitting Title V systems is blowing my mind right now, that we're talking about millions of dollars in sewering, yet we're still installing Title V systems. Even a system that gets 50% removal is still better than a Title V system. So to borrow a George Hoyfelder, I call it George Hoyfelderisms, you have to stop digging the hole, and we all know that we need to stop making the problem worse. So I would definitely encourage this committee to meet with the Board of Health and talk about this really critical first step. Start slow, just new construction in those areas that are not going to ever get sewer in the next century. It's not hundreds of systems that the town is then going to be responsible for. It's however many, how many new homes are built in the town per year. So it's a really good way to start slow. It's a good way for the test center and the new budding RME to sort of, get its chops around. And so I would really, really encourage that, and the coalition will do whatever it can to support a Board of Health regulation that requires new construction to do D-night systems.
Currently, the Board of Health for all new construction requires it to be designed to accommodate an IA. So, when the hammer comes down to do it, people aren't gonna say, well, I just put a brand new system in, now I can't make it an IA.
Right.
So we're part way there.
I would encourage you to take the other half step and just require the IA system. Thank you.
Not sure why we don't.
Shouldn't that be for substantial renovation too?
That's what I'm
That's it.
thinking.
Yeah, we've all spent some time trying to get through getting the watershed permits started and everything. We've been getting some presentations on, the extent to which things might have to happen inside estuaries. I think we're on the cusp of now. I like your idea, we get Brian in to find out where we are with the RME, then we sit down with the Board of Health to see what we have in front of us and what the logical next step about that is, rather than just doing something and then finding out later that we've not done enough or not done too much. I mean, you want to hit the sweet spot. Hildy's next.
Anybody who has an IA that doesn't perform well, take the urine out, have one toilet, and remove the urine, because that's where the nitrogen is, and you bring the whole level down. So if you're stuck with only systems that are right now not performing to the level that you would like to, add at least one bathroom with urine diversion.
Amy's next. Hold your thought.
I support Corin's suggestion, and that has also been discussed by the board. I agree that, so I think that starts with drawing a map of where we imagine sewers will be in the next 20-plus years, and then we add on top of that the watersheds to the impaired water bodies, and we say the properties in that area, if they get substantial redevelopment and/or new construction, have to put in an IA system. I agree that that's a good way to start. I did want to just mention that the grant that Kristen put in, the grant application was for watershed planning for Magansett. And I was initially sort of unsure why we were talking about doing that, because Magansett is, sort of further along in our planning, and it's that watershed's in relatively good shape. But the reason to think about it now is that we are very unlikely to sewer in the Magansett watershed, and it can be our first watershed to think about this IA strategy and how the mapping and implementation could work.
I have a question for Amy.
Hold on a second. Steve had his hand up before you. Steve has been waiting patiently.
That's fine.
I just wanted to speak to two things. Ed mentioned these other companies that were sort of the losers in the West Falmouth experiment, or the ones that aren't quite as good as Nitro E. I submit that they are the best candidates to get into the higher level. I mean, they're certainly a better candidate. No one in this room is going to start an IA company. They're doing.
I might be going down with pocketfuls of money to Stony Brook to get a deal.
And the other thing is the word best I don't like, because that implies there's only one. And
Go back to the regulation. It's inside the regulation. There's a whole description in
Oh, okay.
22 CMR about,
Best
So
the
what's
targets.
the number? In other words, you need to pick a number, like 10 or 6.
Right.
And you have to be at least
Yeah,
that good.
I beg you, go back and open up your copy of 22 CMR and read how they say that they want everybody to be at 10 or lower, but they recognize that nobody's at 10 or lower, so you have to use best available control technology from approved systems. So they're basically directing you to use the system that makes the lowest number getting down closest to 10. That's the way the regulation's written right now. That's the regulation. Okay?
And what happens if there are 2 companies that are better than 10?
You have to get to 10.
Yeah.
You just have to get to 10.
That's what their regulation says. The regulation
Okay,
says,
good.
10 is their target. But they note that nobody's approved at 10 yet. Okay? They sort of.
Right, but it should be
but
made
they-
very clear
they
to
talk
these
about
other
that.
companies,
So this is.
if they
part of
got there, they would be there.
But, yeah, right, but part of it is back to your point of telling everybody they gotta do it now. We're on the cusp of all these systems showing up and making the 10. And if we tell everybody they gotta do it now, that means that we're gonna have to increase the area that we put these into, because everybody's making the 16 or whatever, if they're lucky. So, instead of making 10, you're making 16, so you can do the math for how many more people you'd have to tell to put an IA in. That's part of the decision
Right.
making.
But very soon, Nitro E
But if
will
everybody-
be better than 10.
Everybody said we should tell everybody to put IAs in now. And what they're putting in now is not gonna make 10, it's gonna make
No,
16.
as soon as Nitro A gets approved for general use, and they're better than 10, you require better than 10. Nitro E opens the bottle of champagne. 2 weeks later, they cry a little bit because 2 other companies are now competing with them also.
Okay?
Right.
Then you're home free. You have 3 companies that are all better than 10.
Okay?
And the first few people put in Nitro E's. And Nitro E deserves that bonus because they were there first. But we deserve their competition as well. We don't have to be beholden to them for all future time.
Maybe I'm a monopolist, maybe I like monopolies. You seem like a free market guy to me with this conversation. Your name's Smith?
Yes, proudly so.
A monopolist. Never heard that.
plays Monopoly, right?
This is a good discussion. We've got a couple more minutes left. Go ahead.
Yeah.
I had two questions. One, I don't know if Amy knows the answer to. So we've been talking about new construction. How many systems fail a year? Who knows that? Yeah, how many get,
Scott McGann would know that.
40,
So there
40
are
or
all
50,
sorts
yeah,
of
40 or 50 a year.
opportunities. There's new construction, major renovation, failure of system, sell,
right.
when the
Sale of
property
a system,
sells, sale of property. Those are all valid reasons.
All triggers.
Triggers to put in an IA.
Right, so that was one question I had, and yeah, so that could be written, I mean, my understanding was that the revised Title V regulations gave Board of Health power to say, these are in nitrogen-sensitive areas, we can require mitigation of some kind of nitrogen, and why couldn't that be today?
The Board of Health has the power in home rule regs to say that any IA installed in the town of Falmouth shall exceed 10 milligrams per liter.
But we can't do better than, it shall not exceed 10.
He meant that.
He meant,
He meant that.
succeed in a good way.
Right. So then the other issue that I want to, is, and there, by the way, there is, as I think many people know, there are other systems like the Nitro-E, like the Nitrex system that do as well. If you can routinely get to 5 or 6, it seems, who set 10? Is that DEP? I mean,
And under CMR 22.
right, so the
the
problem
version
with.
10 is their target.
Right. The problem with that is we can't get credit for more than, for doing better than that, right?
So even if we sewer a home, we don't get the full credit. We don't get the full credit for sewering the home. Okay, so chase them those last couple of milligrams per liter. You know, if we can get, as Steve would like to say, 20 people
And
with
that's-
systems that make 10 or less, all competing against one another, and the price dropping out of the bottom, it's feel like making computer chips years ago. They get better and better, and the price goes lower and lower.
And you have to give them a factor of safety.
Well, I was gonna say, you guys are engineers, yeah, so that's the safety factor. I imagine sitting in the room, they said, okay, we'll build it in the safety factor of 10. Is that,
I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna defer to Amy momentarily. Amy wound up inheriting along the way a permit that said, at this really well-built wastewater treatment plant, you shall be 3 milligrams per liter or
Right.
less. No, wait, just let me finish. Getting to the point where you can actually achieve that is gonna take more than what we've seen so far in things like the Nitro-E and the Nitro-X. That's a whole nother level to drive it down a lot more below 10. If you can operate these things at 8, part of it is you have to have a steady feed, you have to have a steady source.
right.
And that if you come in and out of the house, you put this into a home, right? Where the people are only coming down on the weekends, maybe in the winter, maybe twice a month in the winter, and they're filling it up with all of their friends in the summer. Telling them they gotta go to number below 10 is gonna get really squirrely. It's gonna get really squirrely.
if an exceedance consists of one day when you're over that, yes, but if you have a longer averaging period, not necessarily.
The way you get around, you design a monitoring program that says you can skip.
Yeah, you get around it.
There are all sorts of ways to get to
Yeah.
that.
I'm sitting here strongly saying, the DEP's 10 number is actually a good target number. It's in the achievable range for where people are developing things. Somebody might get better than the 10 somehow, or reliably below that 10, but right now, 10 is a good number, okay? If we're having to go out and use what is approved, which is, we're all in the 16s at this point, John, right? That's more homes.
The Board of Health has written a home rule reg that says if your influent concentration is 200, it's unreasonable to think that you're gonna maybe get below 10.
Right.
You then can go to mass balance, and we have it already in our home rule reg, that if your engineer can then show us that you're getting 90% removal, fine. So
Wait a
all
second,
all
John.
of that has been already thought of and put in the regs.
Wait a second, I want you to clarify something. When you say they've put this in the home rule reg, that sounds to a lot of people, including me, like you've already done what I'm asking for, but I don't think you're saying that.
I
think
am
you're
saying-
saying that you're ready to do it, you have it written down, but it
No,
hasn't
no,
become law yet?
It has been and approved by the Attorney General.
You mean you're saying that all houses that put in IAs from now on in Falmouth have to have better than 10 milligrams?
No, we haven't done that step yet.
That's where I'm
The Board of Health-
confused.
The Board of Health regulation, is it 16, John, right now?
The Board of Health's regulation says that when you put in a system, it must operate to the level of your approval letter,
Right, but, that we,
which normally is 19.
19.
But if your approval letter says 10 or 11,
That's what you gotta
then
operate to.
then that's the standard you have to meet.
But where does the approval letter come from?
The
Board of Health.
DEP.
And
The
do they
approval-
issue those to everybody or don't they?
Every technology is given an approval
You
letter.
should go sit in on the Board of Health meetings for a couple times and see how this
Yeah,
goes.
so the
So
problem is,
DEP,
fun.
the FAST system has an approval letter which says it shall meet 19 milligrams per liter. I believe Nitro's approval letter, which is a provisional letter, says it shall meet 11. But
But you're confusing, with, what I'm asking for is a requirement that you have to put in something that gets 10 or better.
the Board of Health could do that. They have not
Okay,
done it yet.
all right, but you said they could do it, but they haven't done it yet, thank you. That's good. Right?
Yeah.
They could do it, but they have not.
They have not
done it yet.
included that in the home rule.
We're the board, so I want to help out here. There's IA systems approved by the Commonwealth, and they're approved for a certain value. I don't remember the value, but I think it's 20, okay?
19. The approval letters I saw for the six
19,
that are,
okay.
is
yeah, yeah,
19.
The Board of Health in Falmouth has said, we're not gonna accept 19, you're gonna come in and do better than 19, and your engineer has to warn you what happens if you don't make the 19.
Yeah.
We're not turning around and telling anybody they're gonna do 10 yet, because there's not a 10
We're
system.
not telling them that either, Steve. We're saying, your engineer, when you decide to put it in an IA, or you're mandated to put it in an IA, your engineer must present to you the suite of data that the county has put together about how these systems operate. You then are still able to say, I don't care if the nitro gets better than 10. The FAST system has a general use approval for 19, and it's more cost-effective for me at the moment to put in a FAST, and I'm gonna do that.
Right.
And the Board of Health will approve it. But the Board of Health at the moment is now trying to encourage, by making the engineers show the data to every client, that the client will see, boy, for a few more bucks, I can put in a nitro. I'm gonna make that decision personally. And I just said, last week, they approved 4 nitros.
And so what fraction of the time does that work on Harry Homeowner?
So here's what
It's
happens.
getting better and better.
Getting better and better, because the homeowner, if he puts in the FAST system, I'm not picking a FAST, it could be the other systems, he's got to monitor it 4 times a year. It's going to cost him $400 to $600. So let's use 500 because it's an easy number for me to use. He's got $500. He's got to spend $500 this year, $500 next year. He's going to come up with numbers that don't show that the system's making what it's been approved for. So now he's got to do another 2 years at $500, right? So every year he's spending $500 to run this system. He puts a nitro system in, at the end of 2 years, the numbers are so good, he's told he can monitor it once or twice a season just to make sure it's still working. Now he's saving money year after year by having put a better system in,
That's good.
okay? So a good engineer in this town can lay that in front of somebody and say, look, you know, yeah, that system has X dollars, this system is Y dollars, but when you get done with that Y dollars, your carrying cost forever and forever is gonna be a good carrying cost number.
And you make the engineer sign something that he.
The homeowner.
The
that
homeowner
Homeowner, oh,
has
even
to
better.
sign
Homeowner's
that
been
letter.
informed.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, we have 1 minute in order to do everything else on the agenda, whatever that might be.
Minutes.
Reports of members and staff. Anybody got any reports they want to throw out? No? No? Shellfish are good? You were going to set up a time.
Shellfish are
You were gonna set up a
great.
time for us
It's
to go
been
see.
a month since we put another 100,000 in West Falmouth Harbor, but they're in beautiful shape.
You were gonna invite us to come down and see gear at one point.
Yeah, I didn't get,
Hasn't happened.
hasn't happened.
Okay.
As it gets warmer, it's more likely,
Okay.
but
Still out there.
I'll,
Tom's not allowed to make a motion because he edits the minutes. No, you can't. Has everybody read the minutes?
I move that they be accepted.
I'm going to abstain from the vote because I was not here. Okay?
I second the motion.
All those in favor of accepting the minutes?
Aye?
Abstain. Right, can I have a motion to adjourn?
I'll make that motion.
All right,
Second.
all right, motion's been made and seconded.
Sad that Gilda's
Ready to
leaving.
vote? All those in favor,
Oh, yeah,
signify by
she
saying
did a
aye.
hell of a good job, and I noticed there was no reporter tonight.